Dead London. The second series kicks off with Dead London, with the Eighth Doctor and Lucie Miller finding themselves trapped in a maze of interlocking Londons from Roman times to the present day. But they are not alone in this labyrinth. A killer is on their trail. One aspect that stands out to me about this story is the pacing. It very much plays out like a Russell T Davies season opener, where the story is simple and engaging enough to keep you listening, but it won't blow your socks off or go down as a must-listen. It starts pretty fantastically, with the Doctor being sentenced to death for parking the TARDIS on a double yellow line. Seriously, and it keeps up the outlandish tomfoolery for a good portion of the runtime. There's a really cool concept in here about there being different areas of London from different points in history all blended into one, and there being a river is actually a neural highway interconnecting them appearing sporadically. I really like this angle, but I feel the pacing and the exposition towards the end really start to lose focus, and the story kind of falls apart. Not to mention the Doctor and Lucie are separated for the majority of this story, which does hurt it in my opinion. It's hard to say such praise concerning the plot itself, which is a fairly droll and messy one about an alien named Sepulchre, who has a voice like Voldemort and captures beings inside his own dimensionally transcendent mind for reasons that never really get fully explained. It's paced very well as a story, and it's hard to say that it drags in any sort of way as a narrative per se, but things get confusing quite fast, and while the first half does have its moments, certainly especially in an anti-fascism angle that's explored fairly nicely, the second half lacks a lot of intrigue or motivation to really stand out. It also is a bit morally questionable in terms of certain threads left hanging by the wayside, such as the Doctor leaving several victims of the plot behind, with seemingly no escape, and Sepulchre's motivations which are a tad foggy at best and incomprehensible at worst. Nevertheless, the imaginative concept of slipping through London in various time zones just about works, thanks to some colourful scenes in the first half, but the mystery that shrouds the story is answered far too quickly, and the solution just feels effortless. Unfortunately, this range's strongest aspect, the Doctor and Lucie Miller's relationship, is neglected, and they are kept apart for most of its running time, which isn't so bad for the former but leaves the latter unmemorable, which is sad to think of really, because Lucie Miller is such a strong companion. What could have been a far meatier story is skipped through in record time, having little time for exploration of the various glimpses at history, and of fun set pieces aside, it's fairly disposable. It's well made and entertaining, but there are stronger 8th Doctor stories out there. Speaking of which, Max Warp. When a test flight of the new Kith Sunstorm ends in disaster, the Sirius exhibition station is plunged into a web of murder and intrigue. Someone, or something, is trying to start a war between the Varlon Empire and the Kith oligarchy. The fate of the galaxy hangs in the balance. Only two investigators, the Doctor and Lucie, can hope to uncover the truth. So strap yourself in, engage thrust, and prepare for Max Warp. Now, let's get the obvious out of the way. Max Warp is Top Gear in space, combined with a Doctor Who political murder mystery. It makes sense that something like this would get made considering the popularity of both TV programmes in the UK. Whilst it may feel a bit limiting for listeners outside of Britain, and the premise is completely unsubtle about where the majority of its references come from, Jonathan Morris's script is not just a simple spoof of Top Gear, despite the surface level similarities from eerie parodies of the hosts to an even similar sounding theme tune. The writing uses the programme itself as an integral narrative device for driving the plot forward, which is more bigger than it has any right to be, with the tension of preventing full-on war at stake. With murder mystery type stories, you often find that the devil is rather more in the detail than in most stories. In this case, it is the collection of the characters that Jonathan Morris has populated this story with. Jeffrey Vantage, O'Reilly and Timbo are all very broad parodies of Jeremy Clarkson, James May and Richard Hammond respectively, but Morris makes sure they aren't just caricatures. They have personalities of their own, and they're incredibly well played by Graham Garden, James Fleet and Duncan James respectively. They make sure the characters have their own distinct voice, even if they slightly adopt some of the vocal mannerisms of the people they are impersonating. The rest of the cast are equally as impressive, although it is Paul McGann and Sheridan Smith who are the clear standouts in this story. The banter between the two is razor sharp, and it is clear that you're listening to two actors who are very comfortable in each other's company and have a fantastic repartee with each other. Cast and script are supported as well by excellent sound design and music, which places the listener right in the centre of the story with an immersive and full audioscape. Max Warp takes its Top Gear in space premise and cranks off some crazy fun with it. It's a hilariously unsubtle parody, but it's a fun mystery tale as well, and a great chance to see the Doctor and Lucy at their best, and a story packed with great characters and very funny gags as well. There is a lot going on in this 50-minute episode, but the story certainly pulls off its premise with flying colours. Brave New Town. Inhabitants of this quiet seaside town of Forington in Suffolk are living the same day over and over again. What's so special about the 1st of September 1991? Why haven't the villagers noticed that the same song has been #1 for years? And just where on earth has the sea disappeared to? Brave New Town is a lovely surprise of a story that uses a prominent secondary Doctor Who villain in their first audio appearance, and it's quite a surprise. Spoiler alert, it's the Autons, but they're used in a pretty fresh way. Jonathan Clements' premise is a standard one that's been seen before in plenty of other sci-fi stories, and it doesn't do much to break the mold of being too outwardly different or game-changing, but there's still a strong and tangible sense of dread in some of the smaller details that Doctor and Lucy immediately notice, and the twist of what's actually behind what's going on is handled superbly with an exceptional amount of build-up. There really is no outward clue initially that would lead you to believe that these particular monsters are involved, to the point where even the Doctor is surprised at them being around. Yet once they are revealed, the writing plays with some unique concepts, and a surprisingly open-ended conclusion surrounding how they can be used for different and rather more positive means compared to how they are handled in every other story that the Autons have been a part of. The quieter soundscape and atmosphere are stronger than they have any right to be, especially given the time limitations that this story is forced to work with, and some of the sound effects are pitch perfect and hauntingly creepy. The pacing is fast enough to keep things engaging, and yet slow enough to let things sink in, and the cast is all good in terms of performances and energy. Notably, Lucie Miller's common sense is on full display here, and her grounded sense of reality contrasts very nicely with Paul McGann's Doctor's more experienced intellect. They really make for an outstanding team in this one, more so than many other adventures, both within the season and the range itself, and their chemistry does very well with some of the deeper material that the story has in spades in concept, action and dialogue. Opening scenes pile mystery on top of mystery. It's rather like the classic series story The Android Invasion from 1975, but it has a silent menace of its own. I really like how the story subverts its location and its monster with some clever twists, and there is an interesting argument in there about the Autons merely being the slaves of their controller, and they could be a force for good. All this plus a number of exciting set pieces, quirky dialogue, and an interesting open-ended conclusion. If you want to see the Doctor face the Autons again, then this is a story to definitely recommend. Skull of Sobek. On the isolated planet of Indigo 3, far out in the wastes of the Blue Desert, lies the Sanctuary of Imperfect Symmetry. It is a place of contemplation and reflection. It's also a place of death. Something from another time, from another world, has found its way inside the hallowed walls. Something with a leathery hide, a long snout and sharp pointy teeth. Now, I'm a huge fan of writer Mark Platt, with stories such as Ghostlight, Spare Parts and The Silver Turk, so I went into this story with pretty high expectations, and came out feeling pretty underwhelmed. Now, the ideas are pretty interesting. Every 83 years a torrential storm floods the Blue Desert, and a few days later the whole region is carpeted with aquamarine flowers. There are planets that approach perfection, but it's all the annoying imbalances that make life interesting. Sobek was once an imperial world ruled by crocodile creatures of all things. The flames in the sky are prophecies of war and apocalypse. Sobek was a world founded on centuries of slavery until the oppressed overthrew their tyrannical monarchy. A few royals escaped the blood purge, and now they are being hunted down. The skull is the repository of all Sobek's history and memory, and it's chosen a champion, and their stolen world will be avenged. Again, this is a pretty nice concept. Ancient battle is about to be reenacted with the Doctor and Lucy as the opponents, two old relics who can't even remember why they are fighting. On paper, these are imaginative ideas, but this isn't one of Mark Platt's better stories. The Skull of Sobek is a confused and rather humorless bland tale that sits uncomfortably within its single-episode format. There isn't the space to tell an engaging story and explore this world in any great depth, and both are neglected as soon as we hear that the ages-old battle is going to be reenacted, as it's pretty predictable that the Doctor and Lucy will play opposing roles. The story isn't offensively bad or anything, but sadly I don't have that much to say about it. And Theft Cosmos. Doctor and Lucy visit 19th century Sweden and become embroiled in an attempt to steal the infamous Black Diamond. but the stone is guarded by forces not of this world. Whilst I was disappointed by the previous story, this episode certainly got me back on board for Series 2. The plot is a nice, quick heist which manages to not be too short. That is a rush for the 4 main characters in this. The Doctor and Lucy have much more friendly camaraderie here than in Series 1, which makes sense given how they're now willingly travelling together and make for a lovable pair that have such a brilliant rapport with each other. Karen and the Headhunter meanwhile return from human resources, something which really helps to make the 8th Doctor and Lucy series all feel like one cohesive whole, where events from previous stories matter, and the whole thing feels like one interconnected universe, which also isn't overtly long either. There's some interesting twists, brilliant set pieces, especially the one that revolves around trains, and every character gets something to do, which is especially good when the story has 4 main characters essentially. Grand Theft Cosmos is an extremely quick-witted and fast-paced adventure, in the vein of Ocean's 11 or The Great Train Robbery, albeit with a sci-fi Doctor Who twist to keep things fresh and appropriate. The plot is obviously meant to be a throwaway filler story that doesn't want to be any deeper than what it is on the surface, and the soundscape reflects that in being somewhat forgettable, minus the opening and closing scenes on board a speeding train. Some elements also aren't given nearly enough attention to develop or be explored thoroughly, which does seem to be a trend for this second season of 8th Doctor adventures. At the same time though, there are plenty of surprises hiding in the details of Eddie Robson's scripts, and a lot of things happen in the course of its 45-minute runtime, to which it's never boring. With several big escapes, silicon robots and big moments of action and comedy, it really succeeds in drawing you into the mechanics of what's going on while still as an enjoyable rollercoaster ride of a narrative that's a heck of a lot of fun once it gets going. The Doctor is clearly having a blast playing Lucy's gruff guardian, and he thinks it's quite possible to be a morally sound thief, and cites Robin Hood as a prime example. Grand Theft Cosmos matches Max Warp as the most brilliantly irreverent and pleasurable release of the year. High stories can be done well, and Eddie Robson's script gets the gleeful tone of this story perfect, and his witty and clever story is matched by a very impressive and elegant cast. The pace is relentless and the comedy flows beautifully from the characters and their history, but there are also some very tasty original ideas floating about as well. Enjoy these times with the wonderfully fun 8th Doctor and Lucy team because it won't last forever. Their partnership sees Big Finish produce another unforgettable, unmissable series of adventures. The Headhunter whisks away in a romantic fashion, and it's great to see them return. A comic heist tale that fires on all cylinders. Zygon Who Fell to Earth. Notable for bringing the Zygons into Big Finish, 10 years later, Lucy's Aunt Pat is in her prime. She snagged herself an ex-rock star at the Kendal Folk Festival, and now in the brave new world of the early 1980s they managed together a snazzy hotel on the poetic and shiny shore of Lake Gransmere. However, still, waters run deep and friends from the past are returning. Zygon Who Fell to Earth is a spiritual sequel to Series 1's horror of glam rock, that goes in a very different direction both compared to its predecessor and in fact most of the series it's a part of. It's easily more influential than anything else previously delivered due to the importance of it in Lucy's timeline and how it ends up changing everything she thinks she knows later on. The biggest draw is of course the Zygons, a relatively underutilised monster all things considered in Big Finish canon, but one that's been used much more in recent TV stories, which draw a lot of obvious influence in plot beats and character moments from what happens here. Still, it does use them far more subtly than one might expect, even despite some big action moments that see the return of the Loch Ness Scarrison from the 4th Doctor era, and the script takes time to hammer home the exceptions present in their given race and the prejudice associated with them that sets some of them apart from the more warlike ones that the Doctor has encountered. The main focus for the story, however, is placed suitably on Lucy's Auntie Pat and her relationship with them, and Lindsay Hardwick and Sheridan Smith are both exceptional in their performances and dialogue. Whilst they don't get a ton of time together in the narrative, their connection drives so much of the drama forward, and the gruesome events they do become a part of. Paul McGann's Doctor really gets a lot to do, not only as a character in overcoming feelings of alien racism that surprises even him to a certain extent, but also in showing his more conflicted and emotional side in being forced to make a difficult decision in how things are ultimately resolved. After the first 30 minutes or so of standard but still entertaining Zygon shenanigans, the last 15 minutes or so end up becoming a very powerful ending, with multiple character deaths and twists that place a ticking time bomb in the background that future stories come to expect in this range. The ultimate collision between the unreal and the domestic, the Zygon Who Fell to Earth enjoys the rather bonkers premise of a fallen Zygon warlord opening up a B&B in the Lake District, and even falling in love. Now, if that sounds like a lunatic premise to be warned, this isn't ribbing at Doctor Who, but rather a characterful and touching adventure that tiptoes confidently between silliness and genius. The Zygons are very well suited to audio, as there's so many memorable and creepy sound effects to call upon that make them instantly recognisable and enjoyable. Overall, a memorable return from one of the classic series' one-hit wonders with the Zygons. Sisters of the Flame. The richest man in the galaxy has just brought a backwards planet with no obvious mineral wealth in the outer reaches of the universe. An obscure mystical set has been revived after centuries of neglect. A new race of aliens are hunting for prey. But why? As the Doctor and Lucy attempt to discover the answer, it becomes clear that someone is attempting to resurrect the past, and they need a Time Lord to help them achieve it. The Doctor and Lucy have dodged a time scoop and landed on a derelict space freighter, indistinguishable from a few hundred other ones. We spend most of the time here on bland spaceships, and sadly the story doesn't really spark the imagination. From there, the Doctor is abducted by giant cyborg millipedes, and Lucy is interrogated by a detective millipede about the event. But from there we just go from ship to ship, unsure of who's good and who's bad, wondering the whole time about what has happened to the Doctor, with some fearing the Doctor's gone by Lucy for good measure. The whole "oh no, the Doctor's dead, gone forever" has always been a rather disappointing and boring cliché when it comes to companions in Doctor Who, and it occupying most of the episode doesn't make for very engaging listening. I feel this story suffers the same shortcomings as the Skull of Sobek, in that it's far too quiet and eventless for its own good. Sisters of the Flame does not feel like the prelude to an exciting season finale. There is all this talk of the direst of consequences, and yet all we see here is the usual kidnap, escape, capture routine on an even smaller scale than usual. Lots of Lucie Miller is always a good thing, and Sheridan Smith's performance is as rewarding as ever, but rather than using her character to drive the plot, there is no plot here, so most of the story is Lucy sitting in various prisons, grunting at her captors. Now, my favourite aspect of this story was Alexander Sidding's Rostro, who's a genuinely appealing character, who is great here, but feels wasted in the finale. Speaking of the finale, Vengeance of Morbius. The story picks up where the previous story left off, and as you can guess from the title, it's the return of Time Lord Morbius from 1976's The Brain of Morbius. However, this story adds nothing in particular to the character of Morbius. In fact, it's quite the step down from the original Frankenstein-esque appearance in The Brain of Morbius. Instead, he's just used as a notable bad guy to lend some credence to the finale of this season's of 8th Doctor adventures. Morbius is just a guy who wants to conquer things because Time Lords should be powerful, and yada yada yada. Nothing we haven't seen before, but he lacks the charm like the Master has, or the camp and craziness of someone like Time Lord Omega. Rather, he's just a bland guy who's lost his horror factor of the original appearance. The main point of this story, though, is that he wins for a while, only to be duped by the Doctor by disregarding the laws of time or something. And I guess because this is a story that involves Time Lords and Gallifrey, the brazen attitude is it takes to fixing the mess to get into it by allowing Morbius to win can be just set aside, because Time Lords can work that sort of thing out. It's just a very uninspired Doctor Who finale, and Morbius was really not done justice. He felt very cliché and a frustratingly ordinary universe-ending villain. The first 10 to 15 minutes were pretty engaging, but afterwards it really did feel like every Doctor Who finale ever, with no real backbone beyond "Morbius will enslave the universe and kill the main characters, of course!" And the tension was actually so low that the final confrontation itself had absolutely no atmosphere whatsoever, to the point that a major event happened and I could hardly even feel it. Paul, McGann and Sheridan Smith are great in this, and Sheridan especially was acting her absolute heart out at the end, but the final few minutes of this was ground that was already covered in literally the last audio, so why should I be emotional when you just spent 50 minutes beforehand doing the exact same thing? Sisters of the Flame and The Vengeance of Morbius as an adventure continues the trend of the respective 8th Doctor Adventures series. It concludes by being fairly inconsistent as a season finale. Even though it is technically one connected story across 2 audios, its respective halves are vastly different enough in quality to be considered separate stories in their own right, and the plot they work together to tell. After an incredibly interesting first half that skillfully puts pieces into place and boasts one of the most underrated character duos in all of Big Finish history, things more or less fall flat on their face and fail to deliver on the potential that they have with a bland narrative that goes by too fast and greatly underutilises its core villains. Sisters is a pretty bonkers story but very repetitive by itself, but Vengeance ends up leaving you far colder than it should be despite its strong ending. And while the ideas behind it could have made for something marvellous, and Paul McGann and Sheridan Smith are again splendid all round, the result is a well-intentioned but erratic ending that works better in pieces rather than as a complete entity. This finale feels like it only exists to get to a cliffhanger that will lead into Series 3, and as a result, overall this makes Series 2 a step down from Series 1. Join me next time where we'll be discussing Series 3 of the 8th Doctor and Lucie Miller adventures. I will see you then. Goodbye.